All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Jordan Wired. I am the Director of Voice Virtualization for the Eastern region of the United States. Today we're going to talk about virtualization and how it is a catalyst for some new innovative things that are happening within the communications and UC world. So today we're going to talk about a couple different things, but it's really going to kind of be around recognition of change, essentially where we have come from, where we're at today, and then where we're going. We're also going to talk about some emerging deployment capabilities. It's not necessarily just about what traditionally the monolithic PBX appliance is anymore, and how we're deploying these applications and what it looks like generically to your organization's framework and strategies. We're also going to talk about unified communications applications within the big picture framework, and again, how it's relevant and no longer autonomous to large data-centric architectural designs and deployments. So real quick, before we jump into it, let's just kind of give a little overview of Mitel real quick. Mitel Networks is a global innovator of unified communications and business productivity and communications software. The key word there is software. How we do it essentially is by a sole focus of enabling unified communications and collaboration, underlying leveraging virtualization as a catalyst towards that. Sole discipline, we are not a manufacturer of switches, routers, anything else other than communications products. And why do we do it? Because we essentially believe that everybody deserves to be connected and be able to communicate however they best receive their business interactions, anywhere in the world over any device of their choosing. So real quick, just from a vision status, we essentially are driving to be the premier business communications and collaboration company in our industry, period. Not necessarily the largest, just simply the best. We as a company feel we are much more agile than a lot of the larger competition when it comes to business initiatives, innovative product development, and really being a visionary in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant of technology and unified communications. So while we get going, let's take a quick step back and talk about where we've come from. So communications essentially in the past, for the past 20, 30, 40 years, has been very monolithic. TDM, time division multiplexing, is a digital technology, and essentially it was just simply that. It was a box that sat either in a 2U rack or sat bolted to a piece of wood on the wall. It essentially blinked when it was up, and when it wasn't blinking, it meant it was down, and that was basically it from an architectural perspective. About a little over a decade ago, we emerged into voice over IP technology. So what we essentially did is we took that physical appliance, that physical blinking box with all the cards in it that sat either in the rack or on the wall, and we essentially converged the traffic utilizing the same core and aggregation as the other data-centric packets we're using. But that was really just a bridge, so to speak, a stopgap to where we're at today. So about 2.5 years ago, Mitel Networks decoupled. And when I say decoupled, I'm talking about the extraction of the software component from the hardware, and essentially doing it in a native and agnostic fashion to where the infrastructure that the applications, that the software stream resides in is now secondary. And the integrity of the application and the transparency of that environment is really the priority now. So essentially we went from a physical box, which was pushing voice over IP technology through the same switch and aggregation, and now we've essentially gone 100% logical to where it is now just another application within an ecosystem using that same data-centric transports, aggregation, etc. So what's really going on out there? A lot of people have talked about the acronym BYOD, bring your own device, and really just that, you know, back in the day, a long time ago, up until recently actually, the IT department essentially used to define the business processes that in turn govern the end user's experience. A great scenario would be a new hire comes into a company and they say, here is your desk phone, here is your physical desk, here is your desktop, here are your applications and your permissions, etc. Take it or leave it. If you don't like it, that's too bad because it's the same at every single company. no options from a consumerization standpoint for what the technology was. And as the consumerization of IT and new technologies emerge, different types of smartphones and tablets and the Android movement, the iOS movement, all these different things, there's actually becoming more of a symbiotic relationship between the end users, the business processes, and how IT is going to govern and administrate to that. So this slide I took from Network World. It's a little less than a year old, and really this speaks to what is happening in the bring your own device movement, the tablets, the telephone, the smart PDAs, all that stuff. What is the #1 application being offered on mobile devices today? And as you can see, in a very dominant fashion, the extension of what would be the PBX functionality, the communications, not necessarily just the voice, is the #1 application being offered on mobile devices today. So when we talk about virtualization, really there's two different viewpoints, so to speak. There is the IT administrator's viewpoint of what virtualization is, but then there's also the end user and the consumer's viewpoint of what virtualization is. From a 50,000-foot holistic viewpoint, really what virtualization means is the removal of physical limitations and barriers and replacing it with logical process. So from an IT perspective, it could be a hypervisor. It could be leveraging automation, self-healing, proactive, not reactive type of architectural perspectives. And for a consumer and or end user, it could be being able to operate in a business environment without necessarily being physically tied to a specific environment, i.e. a desk. This is the desk where I must sit all day. This is the office that I must be at. If I'm not here physically, then I cannot be my most productive. And really to that point, that was the birth of unified communications, the capability to have all those different business interactions based on a bunch of geographical contingencies and not necessarily stuck to that one specific location in order for people to be productive. So what Mitel essentially has done is enabled a profile. We have essentially gone from where, regardless if you're in the office or if you're in a meeting or if you're traveling or whatever the scenario would be, the capability to predetermine the way that you best communicate based on a bunch of different thresholds and customization capabilities that we're going to get into. But at the end of the day, when we talk about profiles, it's not necessarily about the handset, the telephone that sits on the desk so much anymore. That telephone, that handset, actually is now just considered an endpoint from a series of endpoints that are essentially tethered to somebody's profile. So when we talk about the virtualization of unified communications, think of it from an end user centric perspective. Everybody now gets their own profile. And in that profile, they can customize a multitude of different ways that they communicate, from instant messaging to voice communications, how they receive their voicemails, how they share files, whiteboarding, domain federation, security, all of these different things. They can actually govern how they want to receive those business interactions to ensure that they are as productive as possible for what fits best for their specific life. So what we're looking at here is our UI. It's our user interface. Essentially, it's the dashboard where our clients, our customers have the capability to customize their profile, essentially customize how they receive those business interactions. And what you're seeing here is something that we call dynamic status. And what a dynamic status is just that. If I am at work, if I am in the office, if I'm at home, at lunch, out of the office, you can even program your own customized statuses. But basically, based off of whatever your status currently is, you can then best receive your business interactions. A great example would be if I'm traveling for the day, why would I want my desk phone to ring? Or if I am at home, why would I like all of my peripheral devices to ring when I still want just my desk phone? Or perhaps I'm in a meeting and I only want to receive instant messages or collaborations, but no video chat, nothing like that, no telephone calls because I'm in a meeting. And being able to customize that on a per user basis. So the idea when we talk about end user profile enablement and communications from a larger obtuse perspective, and not necessarily just about talking on a phone per se, it needs to extend to a multitude of different types of devices in order to cater to the geographical environment that perhaps the end user and or consumer would be in. So what Mitel has done is we have created a native application essentially that establishes a complete transparency from a profile perspective regardless of the device. So we're talking about native applications that can be pulled down from Android market, BlackBerry app world, anything on the Mac, Apple Store. At the end of the day, if you have a device, we have an application for it. And to that point, there are still some devices out there. There are some scenarios and environments where we want to be able to access our communications portal, our profile UI, so to speak, but we can't get to it in any other way but web-based. So we even offer the capability for users and end users to be able to go onto a web page portal, secure, and be able to change their statuses, communicate, collaborate, federate, all of these different things. And this is all real time. And that's really where the sizzle comes in. When we make a change on our application on device A, the same change is completely transparent to device E, and so forth. Another thing that when we get into the mobile integration and having a native application for a multitude of different types of mobility enhancing devices is something that recently came out called geopinning. And geopinning essentially gives us the capability from a GPS coordinate to place a pin and then define a radius around that pin, and based on whether I'm within that radius or outside of that radius, it changes my dynamic status. So a good example would be I have a geopin over my house, I have a geopin over my office, I have a geopin at the airport, and based on when I walk outside of that radius, whether it be 100 yards, 2 miles, whatever we predetermine that radius to be, my dynamic status automatically changes for me to be able to receive my business interactions based on whatever the contingency or variable is. So when we talk about end user computing, really, that fits very well into the whole virtual profile enablement, so to speak. This is a trend that is not going anywhere. People are reducing sprawl. People are essentially taking all of the processing that is going, sitting locally on a desktop device and just simply sticking it out in the cloud in the data center with their other virtualization strategies. And what Mitel essentially has done is eliminated the autonomy that communications has always created, soft phones, etc., in end user computing environments, to where essentially when a user is pulling down their profile, when they're pulling down their cloud desktop, their environment, at the same time, through Active Directory integration, they are also what would be hoteling or hot desking. They would be signing into their communication profile environment as well. And based on whatever the device is, we can also image a soft phone through that same session, the end user computing session, and to where they do not necessarily have to have a separate plan from a communication handset, anything like that. It all comes through that one single sign-on session. A little bit of architecture real quick. So this has been a capability that's been out for a long time. The issue that everybody, all the manufacturers essentially were running into when we were trying to image a soft phone through a cloud-based desktop environment was essentially media streaming. It was very taxing and took a big toll on the data center when you were running voice and media up through the data center from a client A, having to go through that data center and then going to client B. And scaling was the issue. We could do 5, we could do 10 users, but what if we wanted to do 500, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 users? It essentially became cost prohibitive because the data center would have had to be upgraded, and it caused a lot more from an administrative perspective, a lot more issues. So what Mitel did recently is we created essentially a workaround to where that cloud-based desktop, that single sign-on architecture, breaks the RTP from the PCO IP channel, and we run that RTP through the DMZ, And that's how essentially we bypass the voice going through the data center in a secure manner, and not necessarily having to tax that environment, tax the virtual resources. The PCOIP travels through as if nothing has ever happened, and then the RTP, the voice packets, essentially just skims past the data center, and it's more of a peer-to-peer direct routing type of architecture. So when we, about 2.5 years ago, we ended up forming a very tight relationship with VMware. We spent a lot of time in their labs. They spent a lot of time in our labs, and we worked on this integration. The first 1.0 was the virtualization of unified communications, essentially delivering an OVA directly into vSphere, and then being able to treat communications as just another application within that environment. And we'll get a little more into that. But we also did some other things with VMware and some of their acquisitions, and Zimbra is one of them. So what we essentially did is we wrote some code into Zimbra, mail client, to where we enable click-to-call, call history, visual voicemail, instant messaging, presence, all of these things that you would get from our UI that we saw previously in a couple slides ago, but now it's essentially just integrated directly into the mail client, to where communications is now just another tab for them to click, the same tab right next to what would be their email, etc. So the idea, again, is to eliminate the autonomy that communications has always created in these types of deployment capabilities, and essentially just be generic and native to whatever the environment is. This is phase 1. We are expecting phase 2 very shortly. Phase 2 will include things like presence indicators and some other different types of unified messaging and collaboration points. So let's have a little bit of fun and get into some architecture. So I have a very interesting role with Mitel. I cover the entire eastern region of the United States, and I get to listen to people like yourselves talk about some of the issues that they're having from a communication perspective. How are they going to optimize their communications environment, starting from baseline phone systems? So really, we built this graph to kind of articulate what that migration roadmap, what that migration strategy looks like, and why virtualization is a huge catalyst of it. So let's visualize something briefly. There's an organization with 100 locations, and through those 100 locations, there is a mix match of different types of manufacturers' phone systems, PBXs. Very custom code. They're very proprietary to their own selves. From an administrative perspective, it is very cost prohibitive. It is very, very costly because at the end of the day, you're rolling trucks. You're spending money with a third-party organization to go out and service these blinking boxes, so to speak. And at the end of the day, from a shared services perspective, from a hierarchical visibility perspective, there is no real way to optimize from the way that it currently is deployed. So what organizations are doing is they're essentially standardizing, which is the most logical conclusion, buy one of everything, right? But that's not always essentially the most cost-effective. Rip and replace is not necessarily something that is as common as it was, say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So essentially, by leveraging virtualization, once we get to right between standardized and managed, that's when the decoupling comes in. That's when the software-centric type of architectural capability comes in, to where we can essentially create a reference architecture for a very low, cost-effective, very safe entry point. You can essentially put a virtual instance, virtual machine of what would be the PBX, the soft switch functionality, and then be able to just add licensing, since it's a completely logical environment, and slowly scale, leveraging your life cycles, leveraging the maturity of the contracts, and slowly, perhaps over 2, 3, 4 years, deploy a brand new type of reference architecture, a brand new standardized platform over those 100 locations. And really, the power of virtualization from that point is not just the capability to slice, scale, and sculpt at a very cost-effective and very safe manner, but it is also to essentially enable communications to leverage the same types of automation, the same types of self-healing and proactive, not reactive virtual tool sets, disaster recovery, and business continuity strategies that already exist for the data-centric applications, and apply unified communications and all of the encompassing virtual machines in that environment to the same types of policies and procedures. So what you're seeing here is essentially a roadmap, a modernization strategy from a mix-match, hodgepodge, so to speak, of different types of phone systems. And how exactly do we walk before we, how exactly do we crawl before we walk, and how do we slowly start to adopt these new types of technologies, not necessarily having to tear everything out over a weekend and replace it. So we talk about software. So here's something visually aesthetic, so to speak, for us to kind of understand what we mean when we talk about software. So what would be the PBX functionality? What would be the telephone system, if we want to call it that, is Mitel Communications Director, MCD is the acronym. And MCD is just a software stream. The only constant in the world of Mitel is the software. We talked about that previously. The infrastructure is secondary to the software stream. So Mitel Communications Director can be deployed in a multitude of different types of environments. We actually have the capability to deploy this software, not just on a traditional phone system, which is the one to the way left of the screen, the appliance, the IP-PBX, but we can also deploy that software on a x86 box, any type of industry standard server, ISS. We also can give that in a generic OVA file format to be able to be integrated directly into vSphere, not having to use things like P2V conversions and other different ways to kind of convert that into the environment. And the other way that we can deploy it is essentially in your cloud. And we call it your cloud because at the end of the day, we are not ever going to tell a customer or a prospect the best way for them to be able to create a cloud to deploy unified communications. The idea is to have a native application that essentially just rides the coattails of whatever the existing cloud framework strategy looks like, and then essentially have a future-proof, adaptive perspective because it can migrate. All of this licensing is completely portable, which also helps us through IT roadmap, long-term strategies, modernization strategies, lifecycle management. Wherever the initial deployment comes in, so say it's in an appliance today, it's in a traditional phone system, that licensing can migrate out to the cloud on your terms, not necessarily when we tell you to. It also gives us the capability from a software-centric, a virtualization-centric approach first, to create hybrid and modular architectures to where we can actually balance through the WAN physical and virtual instances. So a great scenario would be a lot of our customers deploy a physical appliance, the Mitel 3300 IP gateway, and they have a PRI, a physical trunk attached to that. And then they also have a Mitel Communications Director instance sitting in their VMware vSphere environment out in a data center somewhere with a SIP stack to the core. SIP trunking is a new way to virtualize what the physical trunking attributes are and prioritizing and encapsulating those voice packets throughout the WAN and outside. So now we have a capability to mend physical with virtual and leverage the different types of failover and the different types of architectural designs and benefits that this would give us. Obviously, the optimization strategy towards communications as a whole is to go 100% logical, create a utility-based service environment, hopefully adopt things like SIP, but organizations can't necessarily just get to that today. So again, this is a roadmap, and through the portable licensing model and through the software-first approach, we can help align ourselves with that roadmap, whatever that optimization strategy is for the organization. So we talked about communications now just being another application within the vSphere environment, within the virtualization ecosystem, so to speak. So what we have right here on this screen is just showing that communications can now be vMotioned. You can utilize high availability, DRS, DPM, SRM. A lot of customers are using Site Recovery Manager for their communications now, essentially giving you as many nines as you possibly want from a redundancy perspective, but not having to write that second disaster recovery business continuity plan for voice like we always have had to do traditionally in the past. You will notice that fault tolerance on here is on the roadmap. We are expecting in a new release from VMware, hopefully in the near future, that they will support more than a single CPU. And once they support more than a single CPU, we will also be able to adhere to the fault tolerance. But as of right now, we require more than one CPU, so that is on the roadmap waiting on VMware. Just a quick little graph from a reservation and a resource perspective. We are very thin when it comes to resources. Obviously, we do want some reservations. It's very difficult to thin provision a voicemail on the fly. So we do ask for some reservations, but as you see on the graph right here, it is very, very minimal from a consumption perspective. About 9 out of 10 of our customers already have the resources and the capability existing in their virtual environment to deploy all of our applications without having to go and buy more licensing or beef up any of their infrastructure. So what we're going to look at right here is a scenario of what high availability looks like in the communications world. So we have a virtual MCD, Virtual Mitel Communications Director, primary, running on a single server, server number 1. And then we have a second instance, secondary, running out at a different data center, wherever that different data center would be. Now, the IP phones through the WAN are registered to the primary instance. And when the server goes down, when the primary server goes down, due to Mitel's built-in resiliency in our MCD platform, as well as leveraging VMware's high availability, the IP phones immediately fail over to the second VMCD instance. And then as soon as high availability restarts, they go from the second instance back to the primary. The IP phones fail back seamlessly, and all calls in progress are preserved. So there is no outage. The phone system essentially does not go down while this automation is happening between the data centers. So one of the other benefits of virtualization from an architectural perspective is everybody always wants to talk about business continuity and disaster recovery scenarios. So one of the benefits of centralizing, going to a distributed type of a centralized, not distributed architecture, is a new business continuity strategy by leveraging mobility. So essentially what you have here is you have your virtual applications sitting in your data center, and you have your IP phones that are registered up to that data center. Very simple. What if we lose those IP phones? What if we lose that spoke, essentially, on the spoken hub through the MPLS? Or what if we lose that WAN link? Traditionally, an office would be completely down. The IP phones, it would either cost a lot of money out of pocket to do different types of resiliency, redundancy, recoverable appliances, premise-based with failover and all this different stuff. But by virtualizing and centralizing these applications, essentially we are now using mobility as the business continuity strategy. So when we lose that WAN link, it's not necessarily so tied to the phones anymore, but everybody else, since their profiles and the integrity of the applications are still up within the data center, everybody can go to their 7 different, you're given up to 8 different types of endpoints that you can communicate, that you can receive your business interactions over. You're really only losing one of those 8. So they can go essentially to the other 7 endpoints and still receive that same communication environment, that same profile transparency, to where cell phones and tablets and virtual desktops environments and all these different things are now essentially the business continuity strategy. And we do not have to spend a lot of money on survivable branch appliances. We do not have to spend a bunch of money on figuring out at the end of the day, how are we going to maintain this office's productivity if the WAN link goes down? We've solved it. This is not necessarily 100% Mitel. This is a capability of centralizing and virtualizing the communication applications out in the data center and using carriers like cellular carrier backbones as a secondary transport to still be able to push out those business interactions. So in summary, why would we virtualize unified communications? There's a lot of options out there. There's physical, there's virtual, there's hybrids, convergence, all these different types of things. Why would we virtualize unified communications? What are the true IT and business benefits of bringing what was the PBX functionality, the conference bridge, the unified messaging, the voicemail, all these different things, and encapsulating those within vSphere? So the first benefit is it essentially enables the IT organization to have a future-proof approach. So it gives us integration points, generic integration points, into existing and future desired IT framework strategies. The way that it is deployed today does not necessarily mean that's the way it must be deployed 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because we leverage software longevity and we leverage the portable licensing model. Another benefit of virtualizing unified communications is extending the life cycles. By leveraging those modernization strategies and the native software longevity, as your organization updates their infrastructure, they go to new different types of processors and new SANs, and they modernize. From a communication standpoint, we just ride those same coattails. So the traditional 5 to 10 years per PBX, and then you have to replace it with a new one, becomes 15 to 20 years, because at the end of the day, it's just software. The third benefit, and it sounds a little marketing, I'll be honest, but essentially it gives you a cloud insurance policy. And what I mean by that is if you have a cloud, if you would like to create a cloud, maybe you don't even like the cloud, but the idea is that whatever your cloud is, whenever you're ready, whatever your migration roadmap, so to speak, is on your terms, our applications will migrate into that. And the last benefit of virtualizing unified communications is location and device agnostic business enablement. Well, that's a mouthful. What does that really mean? Well, what that means is that it doesn't matter where you're at in the world, and it doesn't matter how you want to receive those business interactions based on whatever personal device that you want to work off of. Unified communications and collaboration for everybody. Thank you very much for your time today.